every reason to think they were Germans. They were in professions, they spoke German. Their families had been living in Germany for 1,000 years, albeit one might say in ghettos for a long time. But even the language they spoke was, a medieval form of German. The greatest Jewish writers were writers in German. So they did feel a kinship to German culture. For instance, the Jews in Prague always identified themselves as they supported all German institutions. And many of them were German nationalists.
Yeah,
they also supported the Habsburg Empire.
The German Jews thought they were German, but did the non-Jewish Germans think they were part of the same family?
Right. Some did and some did not. Unfortunately, the ones who did not were the ones who won in the end with the Nazis. But, many German Christians, and German Jews have told me this. They had Christian friends who accepted them, and they, I was reading a biography of Franz Werfel, the author, the Prague Jewish or the Prague German Jewish novelist. He lived entirely in a German society. Most of his friends weren't Jews, and he was absolutely astonished by what happened after 1933. So were other Jews like Ernst Kantorowicz, who was a member of the Freikorps. He was on the far right. He was a German Jew. There were the fact that so many German Jews were shocked by what happened, to me suggests that it was not just self-delusion. I mean, they really did have German friends. I think this is what is really frightening, and this, of course, is not what we're told. It's the fact that Jews were assimilated into German society as far as they were, and yet this happened to them in the end. If I took the view that every German Christian was an anti-Semite, if I believed like Goldhagen, Daniel Goldhagen, that every German was waiting to kill a Jew in Kristallnacht or something like that, then there'd be no problem, right? Because this is a particularly nasty, disgusting anti-Semitic country. The problem, I think, is that Jews and Christians did get along. You have Christians who turn against Jews after the Nazis take power, in a way that shocks their Jewish neighbors. So this is sort of the scary thing.
Yeah, but I'm not talking about getting along. How could they feel like they had a common ancestors when for Jews their ancestors are Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Moses, Rabbi Akiva? But for Germans, their ancestors are none of those people. They're very different ancestry in a non-rational feeling sense.
Yeah, I suppose that would be true. But if you tell yourself that wir sind Deutsche des Staatsbürger des mosaischen Glaubens, that we're German citizens of the Mosaic belief, or something like this, and this is what you said. You do believe that, so that even though Moses is your spiritual ancestor, the Germans are your people. You've lived there.
Right, but any definition of nation in its traditional sense has to exclude Jews from the Gentile nation because you have different ancestry and different heroes.
Yeah, I think you're looking at it from the perspective of the present moment. But if you go back in time, Italian Jews thought they were Italian. They fought for the Italian nation. A large proportion of Jews joined the fascist party in Italy. Now, you could say they were badly deluded, but they were badly deluded because Mussolini turns against them and allies himself with Hitler. But were they deluded to think of themselves as Italians? I don't think so.
Well, Russians certainly don't think of Jews as Russians, and the French certainly don't think of French Jews as French. Is that?
Well, Russian Jews are a special case because they always lived apart, and Russian Jews never thought of themselves as Russians, and Russian Gentiles never thought of Jews as Russians. I mean, it was almost total separation up until maybe a few generations ago after the communists took power. And even then, the Jews were recognizable, and they sort of stayed in their own group. And there was still anti-Semitism in Russia, even under the communists. But I think situations in Western countries were generally different. And
France. Do you think the French have historically thought of French Jews as members of the French nation, or as outsiders who are living among them, no matter how many generations they've lived among them?
Yeah, I think France is a problem. I think, though, Israel's a problem because obviously the Jews there, in many cases pretend to be one nation, they are actually different nations. They're genetically different. They're culturally different. They're different in every way, except that they all claim to be Jews, right? I mean, what does a Yemenite Jew have in common with a German Jew?
Nothing. Nothing.
Right. But the myth of Zionism is that they're all one nation with shared ancestors.
Well, what about Poland? I mean, were Poles thinking that Polish Jews were really Poles?
No.
I mean, no way.
Absolutely never. No, I agree. Eastern Europe is a special problem. And if you look at Jews who come from Eastern Europe, they dislike Gentiles a lot more than German or Italian Jews do. You know, I mean, there's a history of very bad relations with the Christians and mutual hatred going back many centuries. And they never really identified with those nations.
An identifying Jew believes that Jews are God's chosen people. I don't know how he can then fool himself that he can be considered a full-fledged member of any other nation.
Yeah, I suppose there are ethnic differences, but you know, then you have other groups living in. I mean, you have a Polish population living in Germany. The Masurians, for I don't know how many centuries, they remain Catholic. They view themselves as Germans, but they also were bilingual and they spoke Polish, you know, and they were considered German. So, you know, there are people of different ethnic strains who can consider themselves part of a nation. This is different from multiculturalism, of course, where you simply, you know, do not recognize any core nation, right? Or you pretend it's all propositional, or neoconservatives tell you what you really are. But I could understand why German Jews thought of themselves as Germans, and why many German Christians view them as German. I don't think the same thing would be true for Polish or Russian Jews.
Right, or many biological men think they're women. I mean, there's no end to the human ability to fool oneself. I know I live in Orthodox Judaism. Every traditional Jew regards himself as a Jew who just so happens to be living in the United States or Australia or Canada, but the country of his legal citizenship has no meaning. He is a Jew. Everything else is not just secondary, it's not even tertiary. It's like way down on the list of priorities.
Right. Well, but of course you're not ethnically a Jew. And Jews are you are?
I am not. You are correct.
You are
I am not.
Right. So how can you be Jewish? The Jews are an ethnic nation. How can you belong to that ethnic nation?
For the same way that American Indian nations would sometimes adopt outsiders, but they can only adopt a very tiny number, and the adoptees can only thrive if they know their place.